What happens when a complaint is met with a condescending smile? When your dignity is dismissed at 30,000 feet and your voice is treated as nothing more than an inconvenience? For one senior flight attendant, her worst nightmare wasn't turbulence or an unruly passenger. It was the quiet, unassuming man in seat 4A, whose phone was silently recording her every word. She thought she was handling just another black woman she could easily placate and ignore. She had no idea she was speaking to the lead data scientist of a multi-billion-dollar tech corporation, and the man filming her performance was its powerful CEO. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. It's a meticulously documented account of subtle prejudice, corporate power, and karma delivered with ice-cold precision from the highest echelons of the business world. The gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Alani Davis. As the global Voyager Airlines A380 cleaved through the thin cold air high above the Atlantic, she felt the familiar sense of detachment that came with long-haul travel, a welcome state of suspension between the frenetic energy of New York and the historic weight of London. She was on her way to keynote the World Tech Innovators Summit, a career-defining honor. Her presentation on predictive AI modeling in volatile markets was the culmination of 3 years of relentless work, and she was the brilliant mind leading the project for her employer, Nexus Innovations. She had settled into seat 6K, a coveted window seat in the tranquil upper-deck business class cabin, the plush leather, the crisp champagne that had been offered upon boarding, the amenity kit filled with designer toiletries. It all projected an aura of serene professionalism, a world away from the chaotic scrum of economy. Alani had carefully arranged her space. Her laptop was stowed, a worn copy of a classic novel rested on the polished wood-grain console, and her noise-canceling headphones were ready for when she wanted to retreat into her own world. The problem began not with a bang, but with a persistent, rhythmic thud. It came from behind her, from seat 7K. A man who had boarded with the loud, self-important air of someone who believed his ticket price bought him ownership of the cabin was the source. His name, she'd overheard him boom into his phone during boarding, was Todd. He was a portly man in a slightly too tight golf shirt, and he seemed to have mistaken the back of Alani's seat for his personal footrest. Every few minutes, his foot would knock against the shell of her seat, sending a small but jarring vibration through her. At first, Alani ignored it. It was a minor annoyance, the kind of impersonal intrusion that was part and parcel of sharing a space with strangers. She tried to lose herself in her book, to focus on the soft glow of the cabin lights. But the thudding continued, punctuated by the man's loud, obnoxious phone conversation about a golf trip. He wasn't just talking, he was broadcasting, his voice cutting through the sophisticated hush of the cabin. After 20 minutes of this, Alani's patience began to fray. The thuds were no longer just annoying. They were a physical manifestation of his disregard for anyone else's space. She took a deep breath, unbuckled her seatbelt, and turned around. She offered a small, polite smile. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you mind not kicking the back of my seat? It's quite disruptive." Todd looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, as if she were the one causing a problem. He gave her a cursory, dismissive glance that lingered just a moment too long. "Didn't realize I was," he grunted before turning his attention back to his phone. He made no apology, no effort to adjust his position. For a few minutes there was peace. Alani settled back into her seat, hoping the brief interaction had solved the issue. But then, the thudding resumed, this time with a seemingly deliberate cadence. It was a petty, passive-aggressive act of defiance. Alani sighed. This was precisely the kind of confrontation she detested. She was not a complainer by nature. She was a problem solver, a woman who navigated complex algorithms in corporate politics with a quiet, steely competence. But this wasn't a complex problem. It was a simple matter of courtesy, and its absence was beginning to feel like a targeted lack of respect. She knew what came next, involving the crew. It was a step she was reluctant to take, one that risked escalating the situation and branding her as difficult. A few rows ahead in seat 4A, Marcus Thorne watched the entire exchange. As the CEO of Nexus Innovations, Marcus had a preternatural ability to read people and situations. He wasn't just Alani's boss, he was her mentor, the one who had spotted her genius early on and championed her rise through the company. He was immensely proud of her and fiercely protective of his team. He had seen Todd's boorish behavior from the moment he boarded and had noted Alani's patient attempt to handle it herself. He saw the man's dismissive reaction and the subsequent resumption of the kicking. A cold knot of frustration tightened in his stomach. He knew Alani well enough to understand her reluctance to make a scene, but he also knew that her comfort and her ability to arrive in London, rested and ready for her big moment, were paramount. He watched as Alani, after several more minutes of enduring the thudding, finally reached up and pressed the call button above her head. The small light illuminated, a silent plea for civility in the enclosed, pressurized world of Flight 88. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding behind him. He had a feeling this wouldn't be simple. The call button's chime was answered by the appearance of a flight attendant named Karen Miller. She was a woman in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her movements were efficient, honed by 2 decades of service. But her smile, when it came, didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a professional veneer, a mask of pleasantness that could flicker on and off like a fluorescent light. "Yes, how can I help you?" Karen asked, her tone clipped and formal. She addressed the space between Alani and Todd, not quite making eye contact with either. Alani maintained her composed demeanor. "Hello," she began softly, so as not to disturb the passengers around them. "I'm having a bit of an issue. The gentleman behind me has been repeatedly kicking the back of my seat. I asked him to stop, but it's continuing. It's making it very difficult to rest." Karen's gaze shifted from Alani to Todd. Todd put on a performance of pure innocence, shrugging his shoulders as if he'd been wrongly accused of a heinous crime. "I'm just sitting here," he said, his voice laced with indignation. "It's a long flight. I might have stretched my legs." Instead of investigating further or addressing Todd directly, Karen turned her full attention back to Alani. The professional smile tightened, and her eyes took on a look of strained patience. "Ma'am, it is a rather long flight, and the seats are close together. I'm sure the gentleman doesn't mean any harm. We all need to be a little more understanding of each other's personal space." The response struck Alani like a splash of cold water. It was a masterclass in subtle dismissal. The use of "ma'am," the condescending tone, the immediate reframing of the issue as Alani's lack of understanding rather than Todd's lack of courtesy. Karen hadn't addressed the problem. She had invalidated the complaint. "I understand that," Alani replied, her voice remaining steady despite the surge of indignation she felt. "But this isn't an accidental bump. It's persistent. I wouldn't have called you if it weren't a genuine issue." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Well, I've spoken to him now, haven't I?" She gestured vaguely towards Todd. "I'm sure it won't be a problem anymore. Can I get you anything? A glass of water, perhaps. It might help you relax." The offer of water was the final patronizing touch. It was a dismissal disguised as service, an insinuation that Alani was hysterical or overwrought. The implication was clear. You are the problem. Calm down. In seat 4A, Marcus Thorne felt a familiar, cold fury settle over him. He had seen this kind of interaction before, in boardrooms, at conferences, in restaurants. It was the quiet, insidious poison of prejudice, masked as professionalism. It was the way a black woman's legitimate complaint was so often treated as an emotional outburst, while the white man causing the disturbance was treated as the default, the norm, the one to be placated. He watched Karen turn away from Alani without another word and give Todd a small, conspiratorial nod and a warmer, more genuine smile. It was a tiny, fleeting gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was an affirmation of alliance. We're on the same side. Don't worry about her. That was the moment Marcus made his decision. He discreetly pulled out his phone, a sleek, top-of-the-line model from a Nexus competitor. He angled it carefully, resting it on his knee, partially obscured by his jacket. The high-resolution camera was more than capable of capturing clear video and audio. even in the cabin's dim lighting. He pressed record. He knew he couldn't intervene directly without potentially making things worse for Alani in the moment. A confrontation between him and the crew would create a scene, and Alani would be at the center of it. No, the better approach was to be a silent, invisible witness, to gather evidence, to let the scene play out exactly as it would if no one of consequence were watching. He would give Karen Miller all the rope she needed, and from the look of cold, unearned confidence on her face, he suspected she would take every single inch. The camera's small red light was a tiny, pulsing beacon of impending justice. With Karen's departure, a new, more toxic atmosphere settled over row 6 and 7. Todd, emboldened by the flight attendant's tacit support, seemed to take it as a green light. The kicking didn't just resume, it intensified. It was no longer a thoughtless thud, but a deliberate, insolent tap-tap-tapping, a constant reminder of his victory and her defeat. He had won the first round, validated by the woman in uniform. Alani sat frozen in her seat, a storm of emotions warring within her. There was anger, of course, a hot, sharp fury at the injustice, but it was tangled with a profound sense of exhaustion. This was a battle she had fought 1,000 times in 1,000 different forms. The struggle to be heard, to be believed, to be treated with the same basic respect afforded to others without a second thought. To have to fight this battle now, on a $10,000 business class ticket on her way to the most important presentation of her life, felt like a particularly cruel joke. She considered her options. She could press the call button again, but what would that achieve? Karen had already made her stance clear. A second complaint would only brand her as a problem passenger in the crew's eyes. She could confront Todd again directly, but his smug expression told her he would relish the conflict. She could try to ignore it, to put on her headphones and blast music until her ears went numb. But that felt like a surrender. It felt like accepting the disrespect. She decided to try one last time with the crew, hoping for a different flight attendant. She pressed the button. This time, a younger man with a kind face and a name tag that read David appeared. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his tone genuinely concerned. Before Alani could fully explain, Karen materialized at his side, as if summoned by a sixth sense for challenges to her authority. She placed a hand on David's arm, a clear gesture of command. "I'll handle this, David. Go check on the forward galley." David hesitated, glancing at Alani's frustrated expression, but the hierarchy was clear. He nodded and disappeared. Karen turned to Alani, her smile gone, replaced by a look of undisguised annoyance. "Is there another problem?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "Yes, there is," Alani said, her own voice firm, stripped of its earlier softness. "The kicking has not stopped. In fact, it's gotten worse since you spoke with him. I am a paying customer in business class, and I am being harassed by another passenger. I am asking you, as a member of the crew, to please resolve this. If he cannot sit without kicking my seat, then one of us needs to be moved." The request was reasonable, logical, and a standard procedure for handling passenger disputes. But Karen heard it as a challenge. "We are on a completely full flight," Karen lied, her voice dripping with condescension. "There are no other seats. You seem to be the only one bothered by this. Perhaps you are just a little too sensitive." The word hung in the air, a deliberate and calculated insult. Sensitive. It was the classic dismissal, a way to paint the victim as irrational and the aggressor as normal. From his vantage point, Marcus Thorne's grip on his phone tightened. His camera was capturing it all. Karen's dismissive body language, her sharp, accusatory tone, the clear frustration on Alani's face, and in the background, Todd's smug, smirking profile. He zoomed in slightly to catch the contemptuous curl of Karen's lip as she uttered the word sensitive. This was no longer just poor service. This was a pattern of targeted disrespect. "My sensitivity is not the issue," Alani said, her voice dangerously calm. "The issue is your refusal to do your job. I'd like to speak with the purser, the lead flight attendant." Karen's eyes narrowed. The request to speak to her superior was a direct threat to her authority, and her composure finally cracked. "I am the purser on this deck," she snapped, another lie. The real purser was an older gentleman named Robert, whom Marcus had seen greeting passengers during boarding. And I am telling you to sit back and try to enjoy the rest of the flight. If I have to come back here again because of this, I will consider it a disturbance, and you will be met by security upon our arrival in London." It was an astonishing threat. Karen had completely inverted the situation, painting Alani, the victim of the harassment, as the potential cause of a disturbance. She was threatening a respected scientist with law enforcement for having the audacity to demand a basic level of comfort and respect. Alani was speechless. She stared at Karen, seeing for the first time the full depth of the woman's prejudice. It wasn't just a bad day or a poor attitude. This was a deliberate choice. Karen had looked at her, a black woman, and made a series of assumptions. She had sided with the white man behind her without a moment's hesitation and was now using her authority to bully and intimidate Alani into silence. Defeated for the moment, Alani simply nodded, her expression a mask of cold fury. She turned to face forward, her back rigid. She would not give Karen the satisfaction of another word. Karen, seeing this as a victory, gave a final, triumphant sniff and walked away. Marcus watched her go, then refocused his camera on the back of Alani's seat, capturing the relentless, petty tapping that continued from Todd's foot. He now had the complaint, the dismissive response, the escalation, the lies, and the direct threat. He had a complete narrative, recorded in crystal clear 4K. He let the camera roll for another 5 minutes, documenting the uninterrupted harassment that Karen had deemed not a problem. Then with a quiet tap, he stopped the recording and saved the file. The evidence was secured. Marcus Thorne was a man who operated on data and strategy. While his heart burned with a protective rage for his employee, his mind was already leaps and bounds ahead, calculating the most effective and devastating way to deploy the information he now possessed. He was not a man given to public outbursts or viral outrage for its own sake. A tweet storm was messy and unpredictable. He preferred a more precise, more corporate, and ultimately more terrifying form of retribution. He pulled up his company's travel portal on his laptop, connecting to the plane's surprisingly fast Wi-Fi. Nexus Innovations was a giant in the tech world, and their corporate travel account was a river of gold for any airline. He navigated to the section detailing their annual expenditure with Global Voyager Airlines. The number that flashed on the screen was staggering, $14.2 million. That was just for the previous year. They were one of the airline's top 5 corporate clients. That number was a weapon. His mind worked methodically. The target was not just Karen Miller. She was a symptom of a larger disease, a corporate culture that either trained or tolerated employees who behaved this way. The true target was the system that allowed a Karen Miller to thrive, to feel so secure in her position that she could threaten a business-class passenger with impunity. He began to compose an email. His fingers flew across the keyboard, each keystroke a small, sharp tap of controlled fury. The recipient was not the generic customer service address. It was David Harrison, the Chief Executive Officer of Global Voyager Airlines. Marcus knew David. They weren't friends, but they moved in the same rarefied circles of global business. They had shared a panel at Davos 2 years ago and had exchanged pleasantries at a handful of other industry events. Marcus had David's personal email address, the one that bypassed the layers of executive assistants and gatekeepers. The subject line he typed was simple and chilling: urgent concern regarding crew conduct in our corporate account. Flight 88. The body of the email was a masterwork of corporate warfare. It was polite, professional, and utterly damning. Dear David, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to you under circumstances I find both personally and professionally distressing. I am currently a passenger on your Flight 88 from JFK to LHR, seated in 4A. A few rows behind me is one of my most valued employees, Dr. Alani Davis, our lead scientist for AI development, who is on her way to London to deliver the keynote address at the World Tech Innovator Summit. He laid out the facts of the situation with the dispassionate precision of a legal brief. He described the initial harassment from the passenger in 7K. He detailed Dr. Davis's polite and reasonable requests for assistance. He then described in excruciating detail the behavior of the flight attendant, Karen Miller. He quoted her condescending and dismissive remarks. He noted her blatant lies about the flight being full and her being the senior purser. And he highlighted the final unacceptable threat of having security meet Dr. Davis upon landing. Throughout this entire ordeal, he wrote, Dr. Davis conducted herself with a level of grace and professionalism that I, frankly, would have struggled to maintain. She was met not with service, but with scorn. Her legitimate complaint was not addressed, but was instead invalidated and treated as an emotional overreaction. This was not a simple customer service failure, David. I watched this flight attendant, Ms. Miller, treat the offending passenger with warmth and camaraderie while treating my employee with open contempt. The only discernible difference between them was their race. He let that sentence hang, knowing the power it held. It was a direct accusation of racism, a word that would send shockwaves through any corporate boardroom. And then he delivered the killing blow. I understand that one might be inclined to view this as a he said, she said situation. To that end, I have taken the liberty of recording the entirety of the two main interactions between Ms. Miller and Dr. Davis. The video file is approximately 8 minutes long and is currently being uploaded to a secure server. It is time-stamped and clearly captures Ms. Miller's unprofessionalism, her lies, and her threats. I will provide you with a private link to view this evidence at your convenience. He paused, rereading the paragraph. Perfect. It was a checkmate. He concluded the email with a clear, unambiguous statement of consequences. Nexus Innovations currently spends over $14 million annually with Global Voyager. We pride ourselves on our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We cannot, in good conscience, continue a partnership with a company whose frontline representatives engage in such behavior. This incident has put our entire corporate account under immediate review. I expect a personal response from you within 24 hours, outlining the specific steps you will be taking to rectify the situation. I look forward to hearing from you. He signed it simply. Marcus Thorne, CEO, Nexus Innovations. He attached a small screenshot from the video, a perfectly clear image of Karen Miller's face, contorted in a sneer as she spoke to Alani. Then with a final, decisive click, he hit send. The email shot out over the Atlantic, a digital torpedo aimed directly at the heart of Global Voyager's executive suite. He then uploaded the video file to his private cloud storage and generated a secure, one-time use link. He sat back, took a sip of his water, and glanced back at Alani. She was staring out the window, her silhouette framed against the deep, star-dusted blackness of the stratosphere. She looked resolute and strong, but he knew this had taken a toll. He had done what he could for now. The rest would unfold on the ground. The unseen witness had presented his evidence to the highest court. The descent into London was smooth, the first rays of a gray English dawn breaking over the horizon. The cabin came to life with the familiar rituals of arrival, the clatter of breakfast trays being cleared, the polite announcements from the flight deck, the rustle of passengers gathering their belongings. The tension from the earlier incident lingered in the air, an unspoken charge between rows 6 and 7. Todd from 7K was ostentatiously cheerful, while Alani remained quiet and withdrawn, her face a stoic mask. Karen Miller went about her duties with an air of smug finality. She collected headsets and offered farewell pleasantries to the other passengers with her practiced, insincere smile. When she passed Alani's seat, she ignored her completely, a final, petty act of erasure. The plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow Terminal 5, and the seatbelt sign pinged off. As the passengers began to stand and retrieve their carry-ons from the overhead bins, Marcus remained seated. He let the initial surge of eager deplaners pass, including Todd, who pushed his way forward with his characteristic lack of grace. Marcus caught Alani's eye and gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. She looked confused but seemed to understand his silent instruction to wait. Finally, as the cabin began to empty, Marcus stood up. Alani did the same. He gestured for her to go ahead of him. As they walked toward the exit, Karen was standing near the galley, chatting with the younger flight attendant, David. She was smiling, laughing about something, the incident with Alani clearly forgotten, a minor annoyance in her workday now concluded. As Alani passed, Karen's smile vanished, her eyes flicking over Alani with a look of final dismissal. But then she saw Marcus, a tall, powerfully built man in a bespoke suit, standing right behind Alani. He stopped directly in front of her, blocking her path. David, the other flight attendant, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, discreetly faded back into the galley. "Excuse me, sir. You need to exit the aircraft," Karen said, her professional mask snapping back into place. Marcus didn't move. He looked at her, his gaze level and unnervingly calm. "I believe your name is Karen Miller," he said. It wasn't a question. Karen's smile faltered. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. He gestured toward Alani, who stood just ahead on the jet bridge, watching them. "The woman you spent the last several hours harassing, Dr. Alani Davis, is my company's lead scientist, and I am the CEO of that company, Nexus Innovations." The color drained from Karen Miller's face. Her practiced composure shattered, replaced by a flicker of raw panic. The name Nexus Innovations was one she recognized. She'd seen it on the passenger manifest, a key corporate account. She had assumed the executive was some man in the front row, not this quiet man who had been sitting behind the passenger she had so thoroughly dismissed. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her professionalism crumbling into a weak defense. "I was simply trying to maintain order on the flight." Marcus's expression remained unchanged, his calmness more terrifying than any shouting could have been. "What you were doing," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "was targeting and intimidating a passenger based on your own prejudices. You lied to her about your position. You lied about seat availability, and you threatened her with security for asking for the service she is entitled to." He held up his phone. "And the most unfortunate part for you, Ms. Miller, is that I filmed it. All of it. The condescending tone, the lies, the threats. It's all documented in crystal clear high definition. That footage, along with an email detailing our company's $14 million annual spend with this airline, was sent to your CEO, David Harrison, about 6 hours ago. I imagine he's had a very interesting morning." Karen's mouth opened and closed silently. She looked like a fish gasping for air. The smugness, the confidence, the sense of untouchable authority she had wielded for hours had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, exposed employee who had just realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. She looked from Marcus's cold, unforgiving eyes to Alani, who was watching with a look not of triumph, but of weary validation. You can't do that," Karen whispered, a pathetic plea. "I already have," Marcus replied. He then stepped aside, clearing her path. "Enjoy the rest of your day, Miss Miller. I have a feeling it's going to be a memorable one." He and Alani turned and walked down the jet bridge, leaving Karen Miller standing frozen in the doorway of the aircraft, the cheerful morning light of London streaming in around her, illuminating the complete and utter devastation on her face. The power dynamic had been irrevocably, brutally reversed. The karma, so long delayed, had finally arrived at its destination. While Karen Miller stood paralyzed on the jet bridge, 4,000 miles away in Chicago, at the Global Voyager Airlines corporate headquarters known as the Compass, David Harrison's day was imploding. The email from Marcus Thorne had landed in his private inbox at 3:17 a.m. Central Time. As a CEO in a 24/7 global industry, David was an early riser. He saw it the moment he checked his phone at his desk before sunrise. The subject line alone made his stomach clench. Urgent concern and corporate account were two phrases that never boded well together. But when he saw the name Marcus Thorne, he felt a jolt of real fear. Nexus Innovations was not just any account. They were a prestige client, a symbol of the modern, tech-savvy business traveler that Global Voyager desperately courted. He read the email, his blood running colder with each sentence. The description of the crew members' behavior was appalling. The accusation of racism was a public relations hydrogen bomb. And then he reached the part about the video, a recording sent from the CEO himself. His heart sank. This wasn't a disgruntled passenger's angry rant. This was a meticulously documented indictment from a powerful corporate peer. He clicked the secure link. The video played on his screen, the audio shockingly clear. He watched the whole thing, his face grim. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The video was even worse than the email had described. He saw Karen Miller's dismissive sneer, heard her condescending tone. and listened with mounting horror as she lied and then threatened one of Marcus's key employees. He watched her cozying up to the boorish passenger in 7K. The contrast in her treatment of him versus Dr. Davis stark and undeniable. Before the video was even finished, he was on the phone, his voice a low, furious growl. "Get me Evelyn Shaw in HR and Frank Peterson in public relations. Conference call, now, and find out who the senior VP of in-flight services is. I want them on this call 10 minutes ago." The emergency conference call was a bloodbath. David played the audio from the video over the phone. A stunned, horrified silence followed. "This," David said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is a catastrophe. This isn't just a rogue employee having a bad day. This is the embodiment of every negative stereotype about our airline. This is the kind of thing that destroys a brand." Evelyn Shaw, the head of HR, was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "David, I've pulled Karen Miller's file, 22 years of service, a few minor passenger complaints over the years, but nothing this overt. Her 22 years of service are officially over," David snapped. "I want her suspended effective immediately. I want her to be met at the gate in London by our station manager and have her credentials revoked. She is not to set foot on another Global Voyager aircraft except as a passenger, and even that's debatable. Is that understood?" "Yes, David. Consider it done," Evelyn said quickly. Frank Peterson from PR chimed in, his voice filled with urgency. "David, the real problem is Marcus Thorne. He holds all the cards. If that video goes public, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar PR crisis. We'll be on CNN by noon. We'll be the new face of corporate racism in the airline industry." "I'm aware, Frank," David said, rubbing his temples. "That's why this needs to be handled with extreme prejudice. We're not going to hide, we're going to get ahead of it. Frank, you will draft a public statement, but it will not be released unless I say so. It will be the most profound, self-flagellating apology you have ever written. Evelyn, I want a full review of our diversity and inclusion training for all in-flight staff. I want to know how someone like Miller could operate for 2 decades without this being caught." He then outlined his plan for dealing with Marcus. "I'm going to call him personally. I'm going to apologize on behalf of the entire company. I'm going to tell him Ms. Miller has been terminated. I am going to offer Dr. Davis our most sincere apologies, a full refund for her flight, and an upgrade to our exclusive, invitation-only Premier Executive status for life. We will also be making a significant donation in Dr. Davis's name to a charity of her choice that supports women and minorities in STEM fields. We are going to throw every possible resource at this to show Marcus that we are taking it with the utmost seriousness." The fallout on the ground was swift and brutal. The Heathrow station manager, a stern man named Arthur Gable, was waiting for the crew as they cleared customs. He pulled Karen Miller aside. In a small, sterile office, away from the prying eyes of her colleagues, he informed her that she was suspended pending an investigation and that she was to surrender her airline ID and passport immediately. Karen, still reeling from her confrontation with Marcus, completely fell apart. She tried to argue, to explain, to paint Alani as the aggressor. But Arthur was unmoved. He had received his orders directly from the senior VP, who had received his orders directly from God himself, CEO David Harrison. There was no appeal. As Karen was being unceremoniously stripped of her career, news of the incident began to leak internally. Someone on the executive call, horrified by the video, described it to a colleague. That colleague told another. Within hours, the story, and eventually a pirated copy of the video itself, was circulating among Global Voyager employees worldwide via private messaging apps. Flight crews from Sydney to San Francisco watched the 8-minute video of their colleague's career suicide. For Karen Miller, the karma was not just swift, it was total. She was officially fired 2 days later, but the real punishment was the infamy. The video eventually found its way to a popular aviation blog. Though the faces of Alani and Marcus were blurred, Karen's was not. She became a pariah in the industry she had dedicated her life to. No other major airline would touch her. Her career hadn't just been ended, it had been incinerated, leaving nothing but the digital ashes of her own making for the world to see. 2 days later, Alani and Marcus were in a black car, gliding through the rain-slicked streets of London. Alani had delivered her keynote address to thunderous applause. She had been brilliant, poised, and powerful, her presentation a triumph. But the incident on the flight still lingered, a dissonant note in an otherwise successful trip. Marcus handed her a tablet. On the screen was a formal letter, printed on heavy cream-colored letterhead, bearing the Global Voyager Airlines logo. It was signed by David Harrison. The letter was a masterwork of corporate apology. It expressed profound and unreserved regret for the unacceptable and disgraceful treatment she had endured. It detailed the immediate and permanent termination of Karen Miller. It confirmed a full refund of her flight, a lifetime upgrade to their highest premier executive status, and a $100,000 donation made in her name to Black Girls Code, an organization Alani deeply admired. "He called me yesterday," Marcus said quietly as she finished reading. "He was appropriately horrified. He's implementing a company-wide overhaul of their bias training, led by an outside consulting firm. He knows they dodged a nuclear missile." Alani looked out the window at the blurred city lights. She didn't feel a sense of glee or revenge. Instead, she felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. It wasn't about punishing one woman, as satisfying as that might have been on some level. It was about the system being forced to acknowledge a wrong. It was about her voice, initially dismissed and silenced, finally being heard with thunderous clarity in the place where it mattered most, the boardroom. "You didn't have to do all that," she said, turning to Marcus. "But thank you." "Yes, I did," he replied, his expression serious. "Nexus isn't just about code and profits, Alani. It's about people. It's about creating an environment where brilliant people like you can do their best work without having to fight these kinds of battles. When one of us is targeted, the whole company is." What that flight attendant did wasn't just an insult to you. It was an insult to this company and everything we claim to stand for. I couldn't let that stand. He paused, then added, "Besides, I couldn't have one of my top scientists arriving at the most important conference of her year feeling diminished. Your success is our success." Alani finally allowed herself a small smile. In the cutthroat world of tech, a boss like Marcus was a rarity. He wasn't just a CEO, he was an ally. He had used his immense power not for personal gain, but to defend and uplift one of his own. He hadn't just witnessed an injustice. He had systematically dismantled the perpetrator's career and forced a corporate giant to its knees, all without raising his voice. The incident on Flight 88 became a quiet legend within Nexus Innovations. It was a story told among employees about the time their CEO went to war for one of them. It reinforced a culture of loyalty and respect that no corporate retreat or inspirational poster ever could. For Alani, the memory of the flight would always be a scar, a reminder of a prejudice that was always lurking beneath the surface. But it was also a story of empowerment. It was a story of how a hidden camera, a well-placed email, and the unwavering support of an ally could turn a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systemic change. The final verdict wasn't just about one flight attendant's career ending. It was about ensuring that countless others would now think twice before dismissing a passenger's complaint, forced to wonder if the person they were about to disrespect had a powerful, unseen witness watching their every move. 6 months had passed since the incident on Flight 88. The seasons had turned, but the echoes of that 8-minute video continued to reverberate, reshaping careers, corporate policies, and personal philosophies in ways none of the participants could have fully anticipated. For some, it was the quiet hum of positive change. For others, it was the deafening roar of a life derailed. In the gleaming top-floor office of the Compass in Chicago, David Harrison stared at a monitor. On the screen was the final version of the Voyager Compass, a mandatory new interactive training module for all 20,000 of Global Voyager's in-flight personnel. It was the centerpiece of his multi-million-dollar campaign to detoxify the company culture, a direct result of the crisis Marcus Thorne had hand-delivered to his inbox. The module was a sophisticated simulation. It presented flight attendants with a scenario. A female passenger in business class, a woman of color, politely complains about the passenger behind her. The user had to choose from a series of dialogue and action options. One option was labeled, "Advise the passenger that it is a long flight and she should be more understanding." David physically recoiled. He clicked it. Immediately, the screen flashed red. A video of a crisis management expert appeared, explaining in stark terms how this response invalidated the customer's complaint, demonstrated clear bias, and could expose the airline to significant legal and financial risk. The expert then referenced an anonymized case study, Incident 88K, which detailed a real-world event that had cost the airline a premier corporate account and resulted in the immediate termination of a 20-year veteran employee. David leaned back, a grim satisfaction settling over him. It was brutal, but it was necessary. He had poured his professional soul into this. He'd hired the best diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants money could buy. He had personally sat in on a dozen focus groups with flight attendants of color, listening to their stories of microaggressions from both passengers and colleagues. The Karen Miller incident had been a cancer diagnosis. This was the aggressive, painful chemotherapy he hoped would save the soul of his airline. Miles away in a training center near Dallas-Fort Worth, a new recruit named Chloe adjusted her headset. The simulated face of the passenger on her screen was calm but firm. Chloe, bright-eyed and eager, navigated the module with intuitive grace. When the passenger complained, she chose the option. Apologize for the disturbance and address the offending passenger directly and discreetly. The screen flashed green. The simulation continued, escalating when the second passenger became belligerent. Chloe followed the new protocol, calmly offering to reseat the complaining passenger and documenting the entire event in her digital log. At the end, a message popped up. Congratulations! You have successfully de-escalated a conflict, retained a valuable customer, and upheld the values of Global Voyager. 3 weeks later, Chloe was working a red-eye from Los Angeles to Boston. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, she noticed a man in an aisle seat repeatedly stretching his legs into the path of a flight attendant, nearly tripping her twice. He'd laughed it off. Later, she saw the same man accidentally knock the laptop of the young Asian woman sitting next to him, making a snide remark about her working on a flight. It was subtle, a pattern of passive-aggressive harassment. The old protocol might have been to ignore it, to avoid confrontation. But the face of the woman in the training simulation flashed in Chloe's mind. She approached the row with a pot of fresh coffee. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm, addressing the man, "I need you to keep your feet and belongings within your own seat space. It is a safety requirement." He started to bluster, but Chloe didn't back down. She then leaned toward the young woman. "Ma'am, I notice we have an empty seat in row 12, if you'd be more comfortable. No trouble at all to move you." The woman's eyes flooded with a gratitude that was heartbreaking in its intensity. She moved. Chloe logged the incident, just as she'd been trained. The report made its way up the chain, eventually landing in a summary on David Harrison's desk. It was a single line item among hundreds, but to him it was proof. A seed he had planted in panic was beginning to bear fruit. The echo was changing the sound of his airline. For Alani Davis, the echo of Flight 88 had manifested as a new, unshakable sense of purpose. Her keynote in London had been a career pinnacle, but the incident that preceded it had unlocked something within her. She had always been a leader in her field. She now felt a responsibility to be a leader for her people. She saw the subtle aggressions, the dismissive language, the quiet marginalization in the corporate world with a new, painful clarity. She had always noticed it, but now she felt compelled to act. She was in a glass-walled conference room at Nexus, sitting beside a junior software engineer named Maya. Maya was brilliant, but her contributions in team meetings were consistently being talked over or reappropriated by a senior manager named Bill. It was a classic case of boardroom bullying, so subtle that complaining about it made the victim seem petty, or, as Karen Miller would have put it, too sensitive. "He doesn't even realize he's doing it," Maya said, her voice trembling with frustration. "But when I present an idea, he says, 'That's interesting, but—'" And then 5 minutes later, he presents the exact same idea in his own words, and everyone loves it. The old Alani might have offered sympathy and advice to be more assertive. The new Alani saw a systemic problem that required a strategic solution. "Document it," Alani said, her voice steady. "Date, time, specific idea, and the exact language he used to dismiss it and then to reclaim it. Give me 3 solid examples." A week later, Maya came back with a meticulously detailed log. Alani read it, a familiar cold anger rising in her. She didn't go to HR, not yet. She went to Marcus. She laid out the situation, and he listened without interruption. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to be in Maya's next team meeting," Alani said. "As an observer, for the AI integration component." Marcus simply nodded. "Make it so." The next day, Alani sat quietly in the back of the meeting. Bill, the senior manager, ran the show with his usual blustering confidence. When Maya's turn came, she presented a novel solution for a data bottleneck. "That's an interesting thought, Maya, but I think the architecture is a bit naive," Bill began, his hand already waving her idea away. Before he could continue, Alani spoke up, her voice cutting through the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Bill, but I think Maya's idea has significant merit. In fact, it's almost identical to the initial framework we used for the Triton project, which, as you know, increased our data processing efficiency by 40%. Maya, could you please elaborate on the scalability?" The entire dynamic of the room shifted. Bill was stunned into silence, his attempt at intellectual theft thwarted by a senior executive. Alani had not accused him of anything. She had simply validated Maya's idea with undeniable authority. She had used her power to create a shield. After the meeting, two other engineers quietly thanked Alani for being there. The echo of her own experience had given her the voice to amplify others. But for every positive echo, there must be a negative one. For Karen Miller, the sound was a constant, high-pitched ringing of failure. Her life had been utterly and completely unraveled. She was living in a small, rented condo, her savings dwindling. Fired for cause, she received no severance. Her industry reputation was radioactive. The viral internal video had made her infamous. She had applied for positions at charter companies, budget carriers, even cargo lines. The answer was always a polite but firm no. She now worked at a kiosk in a suburban mall, selling high-end phone cases. She, who had once walked the aisles of A380s, dispensing champagne and authority in equal measure, now spent her days demonstrating the durability of silicone to teenagers. The crisp uniform was replaced by a cheap polyester polo shirt. The sophisticated passengers were replaced by gum-chewing shoppers. Her bitterness was a living thing, a toxic growth in her soul. In her version of the story, she was the victim. She had been canceled by a powerful CEO and his uppity employee. She had been doing her job, and she had been destroyed for it. She accepted no responsibility. One Tuesday afternoon, a man in a pilot's uniform walked past her kiosk. He slowed, his eyes widening in recognition. It was a captain she had flown with for years. He looked at her, standing there with a garishly pink phone case in her hand, and his face filled with a mixture of shock and pity. He didn't sneer. He didn't say a word. He just gave a small, sad shake of his head and walked on. That single, silent gesture was the cruelest judgment of all. It confirmed her fall. She was no longer a colleague, not even an enemy. She was just a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in galleys at 30,000 feet. Later that evening, as she rode the bus home, she saw a new billboard for Global Voyager Airlines. It featured a diverse group of smiling flight attendants. The tagline read, "We're listening." Karen stared at it until her eyes burned. The world had moved on, adapting and evolving in response to the very crisis she had created. But she remained trapped in the wreckage, a permanent resident of her own past, haunted by the echo of a single, terrible choice made high above the clouds. This story serves as a powerful reminder that in our modern world, accountability can come from anywhere, at any time. The phone in your pocket can be more than a device for communication. It can be a tool for justice, a silent witness against the casual cruelties and ingrained prejudices that too often go unchallenged. It shows that true leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about using your power to amplify the voices of those who are being silenced. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most effective response to injustice isn't a public spectacle, but a strategic, well-aimed strike that dismantles the problem at its very source. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in standing up against injustice and holding people accountable for their actions, please hit that like button to help this story reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in this situation. Your voice matters. Thank you for listening.